Notes I gave you on the executive branch. I want to get those out. Okay. We've been talking about we were talking about different offices of the White House and so forth. The EPA, I think that's probably where we left off generally. I don't know. We talked about the Environmental Protection Agency. I talked about building a dock over Sawgrass. Okay. Did we get into the executive powers to interpret the law, to enforce it? Okay. That's the main role of the executive, is to carry out the law, administer it. Okay. And I got into executive order a little bit. Okay. Did I show you the video on the executive order? Okay. Well, since I'm recording, somebody will remind me to stop with 5 minutes left. I'll show you that video. It's pretty funny. Okay. It's just an SNL skit. Okay, about the executive order. Okay. All right. So I did talk about how the national forests, like Clinton said, no logging. We talked about that. Okay. Good. So that's about where we left off. The next thing you guys know about, because we've talked about it, the power to appoint. So the president gets to appoint certain type of people to certain positions. Federal judges, right? Now, federal judges must be approved by whom? Okay, that should have come out as a chorus, like everybody should have said that at the same time. The Senate. Yes? Okay. What about cabinet department members? Do they have to be approved by the Senate? Yes. Okay, that is the role of the Senate, to advise and consent to the president's nominations. Okay. Also, ambassadors, heads of other federal agencies like the FBI. Okay. So that's pretty simple. Okay. Generally, guys, when it comes to the cabinet, the Senate says, look, the president wants to surround himself with his people, the ones he trusts. Generally, the Senate goes along with that. When it comes to judges, not as much. Okay. When it comes to the Attorney General of the United States, who is the chief law enforcement officer, usually you might get some fights in the Senate over that. You might get some filibusters. Okay. You can no longer filibuster judges because of the nuclear option that Harry Reid put in play. So all you need is 51 votes for judges now. Okay. But for cabinet members, it's still 60 votes. Okay. You can still filibuster cabinet appointments, ambassador appointments, and so forth. With me? Okay. So moving on to diplomatic powers. Okay. I think everybody generally knows what a treaty looks like. Okay. An official binding agreement with another country. Now, this must be approved by the Senate as well, but by what majority? 2/3 of the Senate. So, guys, anytime we sign a treaty, you're going to have support from both parties. Does that make sense? And generally the support of the American people. So, example, right? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, that we signed in 1948. Okay. That got 80, the vote in the Senate was 82-16. All right. And then go back to the League of Nations, right? After World War I, where the Senate said, no, we're not going to join the League of Nations. More recently, guys, treaties tend to be economic in nature, not necessarily military in nature. So you might have heard of this, the North American Free Trade Agreement. That was a treaty that was signed during the Clinton administration. Okay, it's called NAFTA. All right, now Trump renegotiated that treaty when he was in office. I forget what they call it now. So it's a little bit different. But basically, guys, what NAFTA did, this is important, this has affected the United States since the 90s, is that allowed no tariffs between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. No tariffs. Okay, so you have free trade, which means trucks filled with goods coming across the borders, okay, come across the borders. It's free trade. Now, here's what that also allowed for, though. In the 90s, guys, if you were working in Detroit, Michigan for General Motors, and you were an auto worker, and you worked on the assembly line, making cars, the average salary The average wage in the mid-90s for somebody working on the assembly line was $48 an hour. Now, Grace, we talked about this in government yesterday, or in history yesterday, about how unions work to try and get higher wages. But when NAFTA came in, General Motors and Ford Motor Company, they're competing with Toyota. They're competing with Honda, Kia, okay, other foreign auto manufacturers. When you're paying your employee $48 an hour, and that's a pretty good gig, okay, it's expensive to build cars, which makes your cars more expensive, yes, than the maybe cheaper foreign cars coming in. Now, we can put tariffs on those cars coming in to raise the price on Hondas and Toyotas and so forth, which we did do in the 70s, because they were building more reliable, less gas guzzling, little rice burner cars. Okay, we were building tanks, big, Lincoln Continentals and Cadillacs that were gas guzzlers that would break down after 75,000 miles, where you could drive these little Toyotas for freaking 500,000 miles and they'd never break, and they didn't use a lot of gas. We had an energy crisis in the 70s. Okay, so what did Ford and General Motors start doing after NAFTA? They started building auto manufacturing plants in Mexico. Now, do you have to pay somebody $48 an hour in Mexico? Do they have unions in Mexico? I don't know. But they're not paying them $48 an hour. So what happened to those jobs, those really good jobs that people had in Detroit? They went away. This is why they refer to that part of the country as the Rust Belt. That industry dried up in the 90s and shut down. Large industries just rusting. Big, factories, empty, rusting. Okay, those jobs went overseas. Now, what did it do? It made it cheaper for you guys to buy cars. Right? So, guys, our economy really began to change with these trade agreements. Okay? But the Senate, 2/3 of them agreed to it. Okay? Now, another thing that falls short of a treaty is an executive agreement. Now, this is an agreement between the President of the United States and one other head of nation. Okay? So I'll give you an example. Bill Clinton in the 90s. The Mexican peso was in trouble. Like, the value of the peso was plummeting on the world markets. The president of Mexico, I think his name was Vicente Fox at the time, he called President Clinton and asked for help. Okay? And the United States ended up doing an executive agreement with Mexico that we would loan them $20 billion to back up the peso, to back up the currency. This stemmed the tide, okay, and the collapse of the peso stopped, and Mexico paid us back. Okay, that's a good example of the president being able to do something that didn't need Senate approval. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, a more controversial presidential agreement occurred under Obama. Okay, and that was the deal with Iran. Okay, now this idea would have never gotten 2/3 of the Senate. So this is why Obama did not go to the Senate and try and do a treaty, because there was no way in hell Democrats or Republicans were going to support this. But he wanted to do it. Okay, now you guys remember in 1979, I told you this story about how the Islamic Revolution in Iran took place, and they stormed the American embassy in Tehran, the capital, and took American hostages. From that day forward, guys, Iran became an enemy of the United States. Now, we froze all Iranian assets in the United States when that happened. We are talking over $500 billion. Now, we didn't take that money and use it. We just froze it and did not allow Iran to take that money out of the United States because they had our hostages. Okay? They're still an enemy of the United States. They refer to the United States as the Great Satan. They refer to Israel as the Little Satan. Okay? Now, what Obama did was out of this idea that Iran was trying to build nuclear weapons. They're enriching uranium, okay? And he wanted to be able to keep tabs on what they were doing. The problem with Iran getting a nuclear weapon, they're a sovereign nation. If they want to get a nuclear weapon, why shouldn't they be able to get one? Why do we not want them to get one? Because if Iran builds a nuclear weapon, then Saudi Arabia is going to want one because they fear Iran. Saudi Arabia gets a nuclear weapon, then Syria is going to want one because they fear Saudi Arabia. If Syria gets one, Iraq's going to want one. If Iraq gets one, then Kuwait's going to want one. This is called nuclear proliferation. So the best thing to be is that none of these countries get a nuclear weapon. Okay? So what Obama did is he set up a presidential agreement or an executive agreement with Iran. We would give them their $500 billion back. Okay? We're literally, guys, we are talking pallets of cash that we will be giving to Iran. Okay? They said that they would allow inspectors to look at their nuclear facilities to make sure that they were not enriching enough uranium to build a weapon. See, the Iranians are saying they're trying to enrich uranium to build nuclear power plants. Right? As they sit under their feet, billions of gallons of oil. Okay? If you buy that one, I got some waterfront property in Arizona for you. Okay. Now, they said they would allow inspectors, but what they would not allow is surprise inspectors. There is an agency, an International Atomic Agency, that does this sort of thing. Okay? It's not part of the United States, it's an international body that would be allowed to come in and do inspections, but no surprise inspections. So, you have to schedule a visit at Iran's nuclear facility. We can't go. Okay? Which would allow them to do what? If they knew they were coming. Hide their stuff. Okay? So, Obama did this. Now, when Trump ran for president in 2016, he said, I'm going to tear up this agreement. This is a bad deal for America. And now we're not going to get that $500 billion back, but it's too late for that. Now, here's the thing. Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. That means their state, their government, funds terrorist organizations, most notably a group called Hezbollah. Okay, so with this $500 billion, you think they can do some funding of Hezbollah? Okay, now my wife is going to be in Israel today. Okay, there are Hezbollah fighters in Syria, in Jordan, in countries that surround Israel that get rockets from Iran and fire them into Israel. Now, the United States has given Israel something called the Iron Dome, which allows them to shoot down these rockets before they land. But if you send 100 rockets at the same time, it's going to be hard to shoot down 100 rockets. You might shoot down 70 of them, but you're not going to get all 100. So some of those rockets are going to land. I'm praying that this week there are no rockets. Okay. So, Trump got elected. It took him a couple of years, but he tore up that agreement. Okay. So presidents have this power. It falls short of a treaty. It's called an executive agreement. Everybody follow? The power of diplomatic recognition is the last one I have on diplomatic powers. Okay. This is a very powerful tool. Okay. If we do not recognize your government as legitimate, we do not trade with you. And if the United States doesn't trade with you, that hits you where it hurts in the pocketbook because we buy a lot of stuff. Am I right? So, guys, we don't trade with Cuba. We haven't traded with Cuba in 6 decades. You know what Cuba makes better than any other country in the world? Cigars. Okay? I'm not a big cigar aficionado. Okay? I've smoked cigars. My son kind of got into this a little bit, smoking cigars. I'm like, so when we were in Mexico last time, last Christmas, my son, we bought some Cubans, okay, and smoked some Cubans when we were in Cancun, okay, and then snuck them back into the country. And I'm like, he's like, Dad, I was going to go take this and smoke these cigars with my buddy. Is that okay? Do you want them? And I'm like, nah. Okay. So, that diplomatic recognition is huge. Okay, so here's part of U.S. law. If a country goes through what's called a coup, like where they overthrow the government through what's called a coup d'etat, okay, we, by U.S. law, cannot recognize that new government as legitimate, and that means we don't trade with you. Okay, this has happened in recent years in Honduras, Egypt, okay, during the Arab Spring. I talked to you guys about that in history class. And so it affects you. Now, I have in here about China, okay, guys. In the 1980s with China, when you trade with the United States, there is something called most favored nation status. When you have most favored nation status trade with the United States, that means there's going to be very few restrictions, very few tariffs on that trade with the United States. Okay? Every year in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we would vote on China's trade status every year in Congress. So every year in Congress, they would talk about the human rights abuses that were taking place in China. And we would hold this vote over the Chinese head and say, listen, if you don't treat your people better, we're not going to give you most favored trade status. And you know this is going to hurt China if they don't have most favored trade status. Are you following me? So we use this as leverage against the Chinese for human rights. And we did this with other countries over human rights abuses, mistreating their people. In the mid-90s, President Clinton gave China most favored trade status permanently. And so since the 90s, guys, you and I, now you haven't been alive that long, you don't have a lot of spending power yet, but me and your parents and every other American in this country has built the Chinese economy up from a third world country into a first world country. We built their economy by buying their stuff. We come up with the technology. And we send it there to have it made. Right? That's what we've been doing since the mid-90s. Most favored trade status. So no longer do we use trade as leverage against China. Okay? So as our economy was growing at 1% GDP growth, theirs was growing at 10%. Thank you very much. The United States of America. Yeah. Now, again, this is good for the American consumer. These are already expensive. Think how expensive they would be if they were made in the United States. Now, there's a problem. If we have a problem with the Chinese, what if they cut off that trade with us? Because we rely on a lot of the things they make now. Any of you taken ibuprofen in the last month? You know where the vast majority of ibuprofen is manufactured on this planet? In China. The chips that go into your automobiles and your phones. The vast majority of computer chips, which are vital to our economy, are manufactured in China. The most valuable chips in the world, the most important chips in the world, are made in Taiwan. Now, if China decides to take Taiwan by force, now the Chinese control Taiwan's chip making capabilities, which means they could blackmail the United States. They actually had to pass a law, guys, that none of the components of our military aircraft could be manufactured in China. I mean, it's common sense, right? You wouldn't let a potential enemy be the manufacturer of your military equipment, right? We actually had to pass a law on that. Florida just passed a law that said Chinese-owned companies that have relationships with the Chinese Communist Party cannot buy land in Florida. Because the Chinese people that have relations to the Chinese Communist Party are buying up land near our military bases in the United States, and the Chinese are running private police forces in cities in the United States, blackmailing Chinese nationals that have immigrated to the United States. Did you know there are over 200,000 Chinese students in American universities right now? Am I trying to create some kind of Asian phobia here? No, my daughter's freaking Chinese. Okay? I'm just trying to point this out to you guys. This is going on. Okay? The Chinese are playing to win. You understand? The US dollar is the dollar of international currency, ladies and gentlemen. When it comes to international commerce, the dollar is the currency. How much do you think the Chinese would like the yuan to become the international currency instead of the dollar? Do you not think that the Chinese are talking to Vladimir Putin about this? And to the Saudis about this? To the Iranians about this? This is serious business. You guys want to have kids? What kind of country is your kids going to grow up in? We have to pay attention to this stuff, people. You have to pay it. Somebody's got to pay attention. Because if you guys don't, and you guys are the smartest kids in the school, who's going to pay attention? Sorry. All right. So diplomatic recognition. Okay, we move down to Commander-in-Chief. Okay, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, there's the head of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. They make up the staff. And then you have a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that oversees all of the branches together. And then, of course, the president, he advises the president, she, and then the president is the commander-in-chief. Okay, I talked to you guys about the War Powers Act of 1973 the other day, where the president can use the armed forces for 60 days, anywhere he wants, anytime he wants, right? If Congress does not approve, he's got 30 days to bring them home, essentially giving the president 90 days. Okay, you guys can explain that to me on the test. It's pretty easy. Okay. And guys, you can cite hundreds of examples of the president using this power. Okay. All right, let's move to legislative powers, which we've kind of already talked about when we talked about the different hats that the president wears. The president can recommend legislation. The president usually submits a budget each year to Congress. Obviously, a member of Congress has to sponsor that. The president can't sponsor legislation. The president, during the State of the Union address, can sway members of Congress towards his or her agenda. Okay, political pressure, monetary pressure, these sorts of things, trying to get members to vote a certain way. The president can obviously veto legislation, which is a legislative power. Yes. Okay. Now, the type of power the president has when it comes to legislation depends on whether his party controls Congress and how much of Congress, It depends on whether he can get bipartisan support for bills. Guys, you don't see this very often when you say bipartisan. That means both parties agree. Example, real quick, tax credits for businesses that hire veterans. So if you hire a veteran, you get a tax cut. Okay, both parties agreed on that. That passed both houses of Congress with almost complete majorities. Okay, that would be a bipartisan support. Okay, popularity of the president, we talked about that. If the president is very popular, the public really supports what the president is doing, this will help sway legislation. Good? Common sense, okay? The president can also call sessions of call Congress into session for like a special session, and he can also force them to adjourn, not adorn. There's a J in there. So I am on E3, call special sessions of Congress or force them to adjourn. Adjourn, not adorn. You see that? There's a J in there. Okay. All right, moving on to judicial powers. Some of these you may have heard of before. Okay, these you will want to know for the test. Back it up. Okay. All right. Reprieve. Now, guys, the president has this power over people that have been convicted of federal crimes, not local crimes. Now, governors have this power within states for people that have been convicted of crimes within a state. Okay, so the governor of Kansas can grant reprieves, commute sentences, pardon, not grant amnesty. Governors can't do that. Okay, now, so what reprieve means is to postpone the carrying out of sentence. I have in parentheses usually the death penalty. So let's say somebody has been convicted of treason against the United States. They're sentenced to death. The President of the United States is presented with some new evidence saying that this person may not be guilty. So the President looks at this evidence. This execution is set to be taken out tomorrow. The President grants a reprieve saying we're going to postpone the carrying out of this sentence, okay, until we can look at this issue further. It's a reprieve, okay? A commutation or commuting a sentence is reducing a sentence. You can reduce it to nothing, but you still have the conviction on your record. Now, guys, we have seen both President Obama and President Trump commute thousands of sentences, mostly for non-violent drug convictions. So listen, guys, in the 80s, we went hardcore on drugs. We went, that didn't come out right. We like tried to fight crime. Like we went hardcore fighting crime. In the 80s and 90s, guys, we like Bill Clinton's like, we need to hire 100,000 more police officers. We need to go after these drug dealers, these people doing drugs. We need to go after them. And so what states started doing and the federal government started doing was passing what's called mandatory minimum sentences. Because a lot of times, guys, the judge has leeway in how long you're going to jail. But if a state legislature or the U.S. Congress says, no, the judge does not have leeway here. If you are convicted of this crime, there's a mandatory minimum sentence that must be given to this criminal. And then we did things like 3 strikes and you're out. If you're convicted of 3 felonies, you go to prison for life. 3 strikes and you're out. So guys, we went hardcore on this. Guys, as you move into the 2000s, all right, you look back and hell, almost half the states now have legalized marijuana or decriminalized it. And you have all these people sitting in jail for marijuana charges or cocaine charges or crack charges and so forth. And they're in there for decades. So Trump said, you know what? This is wrong. So he started commuting sentence. Obama did the same thing. Okay? That's what that means. Good? All right. Pardon. Now, this is the best thing that can ever happen to a criminal. Okay? This is not only get out of jail, this expunges your record. The crime never happened. Now, When do you see this? You see this when a president is a lame duck. So at the end of an 8-year term, like the president serves for 2 terms, right? The election's taking place. The election's over. New president's coming in, but you haven't left office yet. This is when you see a lot of pardons. Okay? There have been controversial pardons, many of them. Okay? The most controversial was probably when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon of any crime he may have committed during the Watergate scandal. This made some people happy. This made some people mad. Listen, what Ford said was, this long national nightmare is over. We are not going to obsess over this anymore. The president has resigned in disgrace. Is that not enough? Nobody died. Okay? So, guys, there was Bill Clinton pardoned this guy that stole millions of dollars in a Ponzi scheme, fled to Europe in hiding for years. His ex-wife was a big campaign donor to the Clintons, and this guy got a pardon. Okay? You see these from time to time that are kind of controversial, but they're not going to pay a political price when they're leaving office. So. All right, amnesty. Pardon for a large group of people. Guys, this country's 230 plus years old, okay? The borders of it currently, you know, the manifest destiny, all 50 states and so forth have been in place since 1958. Prior to Alaska and Hawaii, I don't know what year. Was California the last one? Or Washington? Does anybody know the last state that became a state before Hawaii and Alaska? I don't know which one it was, but guys, that was a long time ago. And so, as far as immigration goes, guys, we have had people coming into the United States illegally for centuries. Okay? And when Reagan was president in the 80s, we had a lot of people that came up to the States from Mexico. You had people living in the United States that were from Mexico in this country illegally for decades. They had kids. They had grandkids. They never broke the law in the United States after they came here. They were good. They weren't citizens, but they were good residents of this country for decades. And so what Reagan said in the 80s, he said, if you've been in this country more than 25 years and you haven't broken any of our laws, we're going to let you stay. We're going to grant you amnesty. Okay? Yes, that was a Republican president doing this. Okay? Now, did Ann Coulter talk about that in her book? I don't know if she brought that up. Reagan's amnesty? Yeah. She overlooked that. Huh? The other one I have on here is draft dodgers. Okay, during the Vietnam War, guys, 18, 19-year-olds, right, getting drafted left and right, being sent overseas. This was being played out on our televisions and so forth. Well, guys, once the war turned pretty unpopular, a lot of these people that were being drafted did not want to go to Vietnam. And so they were willing to risk jail. But what a lot of them did is they fled the country instead of going into the military. Now, guys, that's against the law. You're going to prison. Not any prison, guys. You're going to Leavenworth. But the ones that fled to Canada, guys, Canada didn't agree with the Vietnam War. So they would not extradite these draft dodgers. So they stayed in Canada. When Jimmy Carter became president in 1976, he granted amnesty to all those people that fled the country dodging the draft. And they were allowed to come home and not face any criminal penalties. Now, this made a lot of people happy, and this made a lot of people mad. You would have to determine what that and how that made you feel. Okay. Now, if you were somebody that got drafted and went to Vietnam, I'm not sure how that's going to make you feel. All right. amnesty. All right, you guys can differentiate between those different types of judicial power. Okay. Now, last thing, electoral college. Okay. So we're pretty close to wrapping this up. This you already know a lot about. Okay, because we've talked about it multiple times. So let me review for those of you that have been asleep this semester. Okay, the total number of electors a state has is based on what? And don't say population. How do we determine that Kansas has 6 electors? I can't hear you. What districts? What districts? What kind of districts? Let me repeat the question. Luke, how do we determine that Kansas has 6 electoral college votes? Okay, 2 senators. What kind of district? For the House of Representatives? Yeah, yeah. And the people in the House of Representatives and the people in the Senate together are in what body? What? Congress. The House and the Senate make up what? Congress. So you determine how many electors the state has based on the number of people they have in what? Congress. Oh, you knew that. You knew that. Did you know that? All right. So how many members are there in the United States House of Representatives? Total. I think most of you got that right on the last test. Now, some of you did. How many members of the Senate? 23rd Amendment? D.C. gets as many as electors as it would have if it were a state. 3. 538. Okay? We divide this in half. Half. In order to win the presidency, you need a majority. Bada bing. Right? Okay. Now, the college meets the Monday after the second Wednesday in December. Okay? They don't actually go to D.C. Now, these 6 electors, remember, from Kansas, the Democrats have 6, the Republicans have 6, the Green Party has 6, the Libertarians have 6, the Reform Party has 6. Whichever ones of these wins a majority of the vote in that state, their 6 win. These are 6 human beings that each party chooses to represent them as a delegate, as an elector. Those 6 people will cast their vote on the second Wednesday in December to cast a ballot. Okay. They don't actually travel to D.C. Okay. On January 6th, the vice president, the president of the Senate, will count those votes. January 6, 2021, that vote was interrupted by a couple thousand visitors to the Capitol. Uninvited visitors to the Capitol. Yes? However, the votes were counted and the transition of power took place. That's putting it nicely. Yes? Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Okay. All right, so you got to have 270 to win. If no one gets 270, it goes to the House of Representatives. So you got to have a majority. Now, I think I talked about this with you, okay? So Kansas has 4 members of the House. California, 53. Texas, 36. Florida, 27. Okay? What does that say? 29? Okay. Georgia, it's 14. What am I saying? I'm subtracting 2 from each of those, right? Because that's members of the House, because we're talking about the House, not the Senate. Yes? And each House seat has a district. Yeah, okay. Now, 3 of the 4 in Kansas are Republicans. Republican candidate gets 1 vote. California, most of these 53 are Democrats. The Democratic candidate gets 1 vote. There's 50 states. This is how the House is determining the president. Okay? Most of these are Republicans. Most of these are Republicans. Most of these are Republicans. Okay? You get to 26 states. That's a majority of the states. You win the presidency. Now, your notes say 51. You need to correct that. I don't know what went wrong there. It's 26, not 51. That would be Roman numeral 4-2 on the last page. It should say 26 votes, not 51. Okay. Now, did we talk about this? If it's a 25 states to 25 states tie, this has never happened, but if it did, the outgoing vice president would become president until they break that tie. So in the House, each state gets 1 vote. Okay. Any questions on that? You understand? Clear as mud? All right. So let's look at the positives. I guess I'll save that for tomorrow. We'll look at the positives and the negatives of the Electoral College. Now, ladies, you're gone tomorrow, right? I'm going to have a short video. Okay? Like 10 minutes. Now, the bottom part of this, proposed reforms, not on the test. So for all intents and purposes, all I need to do is talk about the positives and the negatives of the Electoral College. Okay? I will talk about these reforms a little bit, which are kind of interesting, but most of them are stupid. Okay? So I'll post a video. You can watch it if you want. Okay? What you need to know is in the notes. Okay? But sometimes it helps if I explain it. Good?
When do you think the test is going to be?
Tuesday. Test Tuesday. So Monday will be a review day. Okay. The review sheet is up on Canvas if you want to look at that. Guys, this, I mean, it's 4 pages. That's it. You guys should do good on this test. Okay. Now, I do have an optional section on the test on economics. So some of you guys are doing the homework. You guys saw the homework, right? Okay. Some of you guys are doing the homework on economics. There's some economics portions. Okay, if you haven't looked at it yet, it's due Friday night. It's a matching section on economics, 6 questions. If you do it, I grade it. If you don't do it, I don't grade it. So your test is either going to be worth 45 points or 51 points. Now, I think the matching economics portion is really easy. Okay, especially if you do the homework. But did any guys take econ from Swords over here? Some people like economics. I don't know why, but some people like it. I hated it. I did not do well.
And you guys thinking about studying business? So you'll take macro and micro? Yeah. Macro, I think, is easier than micro, but so, I mean, it's kind of interesting.
I've heard like business classes, like some of them are really easy and then some of them are like you get hit with a brick. So I don't.
Finance class can be a little tough,
Yeah.
but you're good at math. You'll be fine. It won't be that bad. I mean, I made it through business school. I never even made a C in any of my business classes. It's yeah. Now I took econ in junior college, so I wasn't a good student yet. But once I got into my major, once I got into business school, I never made anything lower than a B. Yeah. Yeah. Bachelor in Business Administration, marketing emphasis. From 19.
Really like marketing.
No, don't do marketing. No. Accounting or finance. I'd stay away from management too, because
you can manage with the finance degree.
right. You don't need get the finance degree. That's where the money's at.
Amen.
Yeah. I do not recommend a marketing unless you're like super talented, like you're an artist,
I would not be good at marketing.
Yeah.
Pictures the video.
Oh, well, yeah. I forgot it was extended too, so I could have finished, but we'll watch the video instead. Yeah, I still have it pulled up. Oh, I do. This is pretty funny.
Boy, you really have to climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Say, what's that piece of paper doing here? Oh, you mean me? I'll tell you who I am. I'm just a real. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. But I know I'll be alone someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill. Oh, what kind of bill are you? Well, I'm an immigration bill. And one day the Republicans might create me so I could become a law. And how does a bill become a law? Funny you should ask. Well, first I go to the House and they vote on me, but then I need from the Senate a majority. And if I pass the legislative test, then I wind up on the president's. And I my sweet, what go with it? My legs, they were made of paper. President Obama, what's the big idea? That bill was trying to become a law.
I realize that. But you know, son, there's actually an even easier way to get things done around here. It's called an executive order.
I'm an executive order, and I pretty much just happened. And that's it. Wait a second, don't you have to go through Congress at some point? Oh, that's adorable. You still think that's how government works?
Yeah, don't listen to him, son. Look at the midterm elections. People clearly don't want this. I'm the black ass. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Why did I come back? I think I landed on my keys.
Mr. President, is this constitutional?
Of course. Presidents issue executive orders all the time.
That's right. I could do lots of things. I'll create a national park or a new holiday.
Or grant legal status to 5 million undocumented immigrants.
Wait, what?
Yep, that's what you're going to do.
Oh, my God. Well, I didn't have time to read myself. Whoa! Okay, go big or go home, huh?
This isn't over. We're gonna take you to court. We're gonna shut down all the guns. So many steps. So many steps. Well, son, what do you think about the government now?
I think I want to go into the private sector.
Me too, son. Me too. One more thing. Live in New York City!
So they did take him to court, and federal court said this was beyond purview of an executive order. So it didn't happen. See you, folks. Ladies, have a good weekend. Yeah. Have a good day.
I just love how shocked she. I love how shocked she. I got my free T-shirt since I'm a kitten. Why is it that cute?
Are you a master?
No, this guy's is just making us take it. That's cute. Trickstar.
Trickstar.
Yeah, I got a free pen too. So proud of you, girl.
I'm gonna post a video.
Okay. Me and Anna were wondering about our baseball sweatshirts that we ordered.
They have shipped.
Okay. I didn't know if they were just like sitting in here.
They're not. I'm sorry. I think I'm gonna change companies next year. This is ridiculous. I emailed the guy like 3 weeks ago. It took him a week to get back to me. He said some of the stuff was sent to the printer and had stains on it. So I had to send it back. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Hey, I'll tweet as soon as it comes in.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, man. I want some to eat.
So she buys an instant cake and she buys a frozen steak and goes running for the shelter of her mother. Is a helper and to help her on her way, get her through her busy day. Doctor, please